Hey, it's Denise from ôHë.com, and on this video I'm going to answer a question I get asked very often. How do I start my stitch patterns? I also want to tell you why this might not be the way you want to start your pattern. The very first thing I do is I mark my loom. I put one band on my anchor, one to cover my 2-stitch edge at the beginning. I've put several of them as I repeat the pattern, and then I put one to cover my 2-stitch edge at the end. I move on to my slip knot. The loom I use does not have an anchor peg, so I make my slip knot and then I place it on a marked peg, and I'm going to remove it after a few rows. I then wrap all of my pegs. I try to repeat the stitch pattern at least 3 times so that when I take the picture of the fabric you guys can see the pattern nicely. I almost always choose the flat version of the pattern, so I'm going to turn around, and you see here on the end when I turn, and I'm going to use a U-wrap knit stitch in order to do my cast on. I want you to make note of the fact that these 2 last stitches and the 2 first are always going to be knit as U-wrap knit stitches regardless of the stitch pattern. Once I reach that last peg, I'm going to ignore the anchor peg because I'm going to be removing that later so I don't knit it. I will slip that first stitch and knit my second stitch. So I'm going to do that knit stitch on that second one and then start the stitch pattern with my third right here and follow it according to how I have marked the loom so that it stops and starts according to my markings. Once I reach that end, I'm going to knit those 2 and then start that stitch pattern again in the other directions following my markings. When I'm done with the cast on, I then knit the stitch pattern, end it with a modified bind off, and tighten my loose loops. So why did I say you shouldn't use this technique? Because projects and preferences, not the stitch pattern, should determine how you start. Here are 2 hats with the same stitch pattern. Both were started very differently. The top pink one was started with an E-wrap, and the one on the bottom was started with a chain cast on. Because I don't know how you're going to use the stitch pattern, I don't start with the cast on. I start with the stitch pattern. Well, I hope that helped to answer the how and the why. Look for links in the description for techniques and a stitch playlist. And until next time, big hugs for my loomies.